Whenever we attempt to do any project, the most important thing we should be looking for is finding an appropriate system, thinking about the project in a systematic manner and creating a framework within which we can operate. The goal of this framework is to optimize categorization and be effective in whatever we are doing. Hey friends, welcome to the third video on this channel. Today I'll be answering 6 questions that will help you build a framework to tackle any research assignment, be it the IA, the extended essay, or any odd research project you may have received as homework. If you want a more detailed outlook on what I'm going to talk today, you can check out my article, which will be linked here, in the pinned comment, in the description, and basically everywhere. In my opinion, the first question to answer is, how do you optimize for marks? Remember, there is no defined rubrics or marking scheme that could help you supercharge your marks in analysis. The only reason being it is extremely subjective and requires a lot more nuance than what appears on the surface. The only general tip I can give any and everyone is to be monosyllabic, saying as much in as few words as possible. As I said, analysis is a highly subjective skill, so rather than taking my word for it, I would recommend you sit down with your teacher, your supervisor, your professor, and understand what they look for in a good analysis. I believe there's nothing known as a good analysis. Analysis is based on your perspective, and it is your perspective which will help you and your essay or research work stand out. Optimizing for marks also involves explicit justification. What I mean by that is explicitly justifying every single choice you made along the way. Say you were to do 3 tasks, X, Y, Z. Now, if you choose X over Y and Z, you should state that you had the choice in the first place and explain why you chose X over Y and Z. A rather obvious tip would be extensive proofreading for grammar and structure and all the nuances that you wanted to include in your essay. Another nuance to optimizing for marks is creating a categorization and filtration framework. Without an optimal filtration or categorization framework, you will fail to categorize important information into appropriate sections, or even fail to filter the useful information from the useless information. So now that we know how to optimize for marks, the next thing to look for is the common mistakes one may make. I personally made 5 mistakes, which I'll be listing in the video today. The first mistake that I made was not exploring every avenue of a preliminary trial. Here I specifically mention preliminary trials because I personally did an experiment, but this basically extends to anyone who needs to do some preparation before doing the actual data collection or before actually writing their research document. Exploring every avenue of a preliminary trial is absolutely key. I have ranted and raved about this in the previous video. I'll continue to do so until the end of time. But I feel conducting a preliminary trial really helps you identify blind spots early on. Blind spots that can potentially turn into major roadblocks down the line. The second mistake you can make is what I consider to be the jewelry of research, information paralysis. Now, in brief, information paralysis is extremely unavoidable. There will come a point where you will have too much information and you will need to sit down and sort through the useful and useless information. Also remember, incessant research always leads to details too far from the basis of their scientific concept. The third rather common mistake is overcomplicating your research assignment. Again, just like information paralysis, this is completely unavoidable. The only way to avoid overcomplication is using a 2-phase categorization and filtration framework. I'll be talking about how I did it in the next question. The fourth mistake that I want to talk about is potentially the most devastating. It is not trusting the process. At least I hope it's not only me. The only thing to do in this situation is potentially take a break and stop thinking about the research assignment for a couple of days and return to it with a fresh mind, trusting your supervisors, teachers, or professors that they would guide you through this difficult time. The fifth mistake was something that I had to deliberate on for quite some time. That is unnecessarily scaling literature methods. This is supposed to be a no-brainer, but I feel people need to be reminded of it more often than they actually are. Do not unnecessarily scale literature methods. If a particular literature suggests a particular method, follow it to the T if you have the chemicals, have the time, and have the apparatus. Now, swiftly moving on to the next question. Before I tell you how I used to analyze research documents, I want to make a comment about proofreading. In my opinion, proofreading for scientific details is something someone should avoid every time. Now, why do I say that? I say that because I had two realizations. The first one being, most of the writing that we do involves a large degree of inference making. If ABC happened in literature, I hypothesize XYZ would happen in my case. Secondly, proofreading for inference making basically involves answering the question, what was I thinking back then? And when it comes to scientific correlations, that is really not possible. So my guardrail against this problem is a two-phase system, the research phase and the analysis phase. The research phase in itself has two aspects, the aspect of gathering information and the aspect of actually storing it in one place. So the way I approached the research phase was making a list of questions. I feel making a list of questions and working on answering them specifically is more beneficial than searching for correlations and working from there on. Moreover, making a list of questions and answering them specifically has three key advantages. Number one, it helps you be inquisitive about a topic. Number two, it prevents you from going too far from the central aim and aspect of your research topic. And number three, assuming each question is answered by a different literature source, this is a really good way to increase your citation and bibliography exponentially. So once I have this list of questions ready and I'm working on answering them, any relevant bit of information that I find, I pasted it into a blank Word document. At this point, I was not necessarily thinking about the value derived from the information I was collecting, but I was just working on collecting information specific to certain questions that I wanted to answer. The second phase is the more interesting phase. It's phase 2, analysis. Before going on to the analysis phase, what I liked to do was take a 2 to 3 day break. The purpose of this break was to basically calm my nerves down and help me return to the topic of research with a fresh perspective. To analyze the information I had collected, my main method was to go through every line and ask myself what that actually meant. Could that contribute any evidence to any results I had already had? Did this justify any observation I had seen? Or did this in general support the central point of my research document? Basically, use any framework, but try and avoid going down the rabbit hole of what was I thinking back then. Now let's move on to answering some bits about structure. Any research document, especially if it is science-based, generally has 8 subheadings: the introduction, background information, hypothesis, variables, method, some form of statistical analysis, your conclusion, and evaluation. Though there are 8 general headings to any research document, you should know that the subheadings within them are highly customizable. How you categorize your research assignment is basically based on your teacher, the subject you are working on, and the central aims of your research assignment. Again, the goal is not filling out pages but being monosyllabic, saying as much as you can in as little words as possible. I want to give a point about the background information. In my opinion, the background information should consist of all the key context that surrounds your experiment. Again, I use the word experiment because I personally did an experiment, but if you're conducting an interview, a survey, or basically any form of data collection, the context surrounding the survey, interview, or experiment should be given in your background information. If your form of data collection is in any way layered, I would recommend you dissect every layer of your data collection process and give context to each of them explicitly in your background information. Again, you can have as much or as little in your background information, but I feel categorization is another key point to keep in mind when writing a background information. It's mostly the second thing any examiner would read, so having evident and appropriate categorization would really help putting forth a good first impression. I personally used a software called LaTeX to write my extended essay and all my internal assessments. LaTeX is a documentation software, if you want to call it that, but it really helps put forth a compelling and really beautiful looking document. If you want details on how I used LaTeX specifically, comment about it below and I'll make a video about it someday. The second resource that I want to mention is that of the DOAJ, the directory of open access journals. If you don't have institutional access to any high-end journal, DOAJ may be a good starting point, but personally I didn't find it useful. I found it to be too narrow in the services that it provided and in the repository of papers that it actually had. Again, I used DOAJ quite briefly. I admit I may have not had the complete opportunity to look at it in the detail that it probably requires. But from first impressions, I can say I'm not too big of a fan. To end, I just want to say that through this video, I have tried to answer 5 questions that I find are absolutely key to answer if you want to create a categorization, a filtration framework, or just build a general method around solving any research assignment. I hope my answers and this video in general has helped you build a framework of your own. If you liked this video, you would also enjoy the extended essay guide playlist. This is where I have posted and will continue to post videos about the extended essay, in which I scored a A in. Finally, to sign off, if you haven't already, check out my blog, which will be linked in the description and pinned comment. Give it a subscribe if you like. I'll hopefully see you in the next video.